So welcome to another wargame review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we're taking a look at Crusade and Revolution, the Spanish Civil War 1936 to 1939 from Compass Games. This is the deluxe second edition, I believe is what it's called.
And it's very deluxe.
Yes.
Very nice second edition.
Okay, it does say second edition. Okay, I want to make sure it was a second edition, not just like a deluxe printing. This is part of our Shelf of Shame event of 2025.
Which we're not doing great on, but we're not doing terribly.
No.
Which is okay.
We've done
2 or so? 3, maybe?
2 or 3.
Yeah.
Depending.
We're getting there.
Yeah, but
Getting there.
Crusade and Revolution. I mean, come on. So this is a big 2-player point-to-point strategic game about the Spanish Civil War, right? One of the precursors, lead-ins to kind of World War II.
And it uses the Paths of Glory card-driven game system.
Yes. So this is a CDG, but it is the Paths of Glory CDG. This game was not designed by Ted Racer. It was designed by David Gomez Reloso.
Yep.
And
Who I did an interview.
Reyoso?
Yeah, probably. Whom I did an interview with a couple of years ago on the blog about this
and
release.
It's funny, I bought this from Noble Knight probably
3 years ago.
3 years ago, because it was one of those things that everyone was like, it's amazing, you gotta play it. It's like the Spanish Civil War game. And it's just, I finally got a hold of it, and it's not on the shelf, right? Isn't that how it always is? And that's why
I was waiting for an opportunity to shine.
And that's why we invented this Shelf of Shame series,
Yes.
was to give us an impetus to play this. And this is the kind of game that I was hoping to come from this series, and I could not be happier with this.
100%.
So we played this at Buckeye Game Fest. We got there very early. We were there kind of Tuesday evening, and we set this up, and we started playing it, and we played it into Wednesday. And so it was, but we made time to play this. That was kind of the big thing there, is you got to carve out time for the stuff you want to do. And this is kind of a weird shaped box. Like, it's very big. Do I have a regular box here? Here's like a regular sized box. And you can see it's just bigger. And they did that because inside of this, there are 2 22 by 34 maps, but they cut them. They've got 2 cuts, so they're just a 4-leaf instead of, I think, a 6-leaf is what
Traditional,
kind of traditional war games that we're used to. As such, the box must be bigger.
I would like to know why that was a production decision. I mean, the map is huge. I will say that for it, right? It's kind of blown up.
Yeah.
Spaces are big. There's a lot of open space, but still, to make it, I think it's an odd production choice, but that's neither here nor there, really. Doesn't really matter.
I can only presume that with the thickness of the combined rulebook, playbook, and the cards and the counters, if you cut it fewer times, they're less deep, so that you can fit the other stuff in the box. But by necessity, the box is a little bit bigger. So I'm kind of like hidden behind it, and it fits on your shelf a little weirdly at times. Just know that that's kind of the case.
This is going to be a top of the shelf game, right?
Yes.
It's not necessarily going to fit inside the shelf cubes,
but it was, we kind of set it up. We've played a little bit of Paths of Glory. I've done a solo play of Pursuit of Glory, so I was, very familiar, as much familiar as you can with the system. And I love that system, right? I love that CDG, and I love the constraints that it puts upon you. And whilst the 3 games in that kind of Glory system, because Illusions of Glory is the East Front one, those are all World War I games. Crusade and Revolution is kind of a World War II game, but the reality is,
World War II,
is at this point, they were still using World War I weapons and tactics, especially with the way that the Spanish Civil War went, where it was different groups and factions bandying together.
Well, wasn't that just it? The Soviets gave their old tanks.
Well,
right.
That's the one thing that wasn't old. That's the funny part. But like the rifles, the trench digging, all of the thinking in the small arms was, and you get like 1 counter of German Panzer ones that were cutting edge, and they're real good. And there was the Russian, I think, T-26s. There's 1 counter of those, and they're real good.
Yeah. Not a lot of them, but really good.
And the Luftwaffe started to cut their teeth here and like really like train and practice certain different things, and that So there was some new stuff, but a huge chunk of what was being done on the day-to-day was World War I style combats and weaponry.
Well, and it was still that focus, right? We built a lot of fortifications. We built a lot of trench lines, just trying to slow each other down in the scenario that we chose.
Yeah.
Now, it may break open later, but I actually very much enjoyed that. The concept of strategically building a line, I'm like, point-to-point map, you've got to come through certain areas, so I'm going to really beef those up.
Yeah.
And that was kind of cool, because it did feel World War I with some new technologies, better tanks, a little better stuff.
Or it's the idea that half of these guys are just guys, right? Yeah. And they've got a weapon, and half the time they can't do anything together because they're ideologically separate. You know, the Republican faction was made up of like anarchists and communists
3 or 4 different
and
groups,
moderates, and so like at the beginning of the game, they can't attack together. They can't do anything together, and then even within those, there's like regional sub factions that like they don't mix. We don't hang out together. And then you get you compare that where you're trying to defend and build these fortifications, and then Franco with his army of Africa comes across from Morocco, and very well organized, very professional army, but they're very brittle. There's not very many of them. You can't get replacements ever, and so you get a blitzkrieg style attack coming from the south, although it's just men at this point, basically. And you get some elements of World War I stuff later in the game with that, but it feels still quite World War I. And the war lasted 3 frickin' years, and it was grinding, it was attritional, and you get that in this game. I love how the card system works in this one. It's, your typical
pretty
events
standard.
and ops, but you also get like the strategic movement values and the reinforcement values. And then you have a little matrix on the board, and it's kind of like, you can do this one an unlimited amount of times. If you get Axis reinforcements, you can only do that once. You can't break the game by getting a ton of German reinforcements, right? The way that works. I think when I first played Paths of Glory, it was kind of like, ooh, that's a lot to remember. And it feels like, you feel the constraints, but the effects of what those constraints have in the game means that you're getting a World War I feel out of it. In this one, you're getting a Spanish Civil War feel out of those things where you're not gamifying it by skewing something one way and like doing a bunch of stuff that's ahistorical.
Yeah.
I think that's what I really, really like about this system broadly, and this game has that in droves. Where sometimes you're like, I can't do this, I can't do that. I've already done those things. I guess we're gonna do some attacks and see what happens.
Well, the other thing I like, I want to talk about the asymmetry as well because it's really there. But each of the factions. So I played the nationalist.
I was the nationalist.
You were and I was the Republicans. Yeah. I feel like it's been about a month since we played the game. But unique decks, right? You don't have a shared deck.
Yes.
And to me, I always enjoy that in these card-driven games because, one, you don't have to worry about the enemy event going off, although that can be one of the best parts of card-driven games.
Yeah, this is a different style,
it's just a different style. So you don't have to worry about that. You have your own unique deck. Within that own unique deck, it is obvious, and there's years that we didn't play, right? So there were mid and late that we did not add.
And it's fully seeded. Like those first 5 years, this deck. Then you add this deck, and then the last 5 years, you add the last one.
But I very much liked, and I want to go back to the asymmetry. The asymmetry here, the Republicans fairly powerful. You already brought up the North African...
The nationalists.
I'm sorry. The nationalists and their powerful tanks and better trained troops. I didn't really have that as the Republican, so I had to rely on building the fortifications, using my cards wisely. There were times where I'm like, I really need a couple of units, but I couldn't afford to let the event go. And some of the events were things like gain a victory point.
Yeah.
Because that's ultimately the way the game is decided, or the 5-turn scenario that we did. You had to get something like 13 victory points or 12 or something like that.
Yeah, it was something like that. Yeah,
and all I had to do was keep it below that number, So I would hold on to cards and I would decide, okay, I got to play this now, right? Because I wasn't going to be able to necessarily through force of arms go in and knock you out of a lot of your territories that would ultimately give me VPs. There were opportunities. I don't want to downgrade that.
No, but early game, it's a case of the nationalist player has to race to Madrid and has to either take Madrid or at least make a good go of it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that early game can be real tough. And so you're trying to prevent that, slow that down, pick up your VPs so that if I incur that VP penalty, which I did, it's like very, very bad.
Yeah. But I very much enjoyed the individual decks, how they worked, how they were constructed. I obviously don't have a list of the cards in front of me, nor the effects or the values, but I also liked in the game, there weren't a lot of 4 value cards.
I don't know.
I think we had maybe one. Most of them
it's not
were...
that kind of game.
No, most of them were... Well, there's a 4.
Is that a late game card then?
It might be.
No, that's early. War of the Columns is that first part.
But it was, most of them were 2s, 3s, and then a couple of 4s. Now, there were some 5s.
But it's that classic, you use it for the event,
and it's
the
gone.
event's amazing, but you lose that 4 ops forever.
Yep, throw that card away. So I always enjoy that decision about card-driven games, even more so than the damage mitigation of trying to hold on to your events until they either aren't effective or aren't going to go off. I very much enjoyed knowing that, hey, I don't have a lot of ops here. I've really got to play them smartly. So it forced me to really think about my decisions. And I found this game to be very strategic, I guess is what I'm trying to point out. Strategic in my line of thinking, strategic in my efforts towards delaying you or moving you or getting the VP down. I very much enjoyed that. I thought that was well constructed, well put together, and the asymmetry is very cool. I did not have the units you did. You had better units, but I had interesting units that, like the fortifications and the mountains.
It's that classic, right? The defender might have worse units, but they have defenses and terrains. I might have slightly better units, but I must go on the offensive.
You're on the offensive.
I must expend those units. It's very likely that they're going to at least flip, and now we're at even odds, and that's bad.
Yeah.
There's got all of that in droves. I think there was no point in this game that I felt like I had no decision to make.
Oh, 100%.
And I think that is a hallmark of a quality design.
Yeah.
Every card play, every decision on the card, how I used it
was excruciating.
Even what I did with those ops after I'd made that decision, you're like, it's the difference between putting a defense here and here, rolling for a defense.
Well, yeah, because you have to roll for the improved position. If you fail, you got a +1 DRM, I think,
for the next time.
But I think your point is well taken. There were like 5 different kind of, I'm going to say, areas of focus, right? 2 in the north, basically 2 in the south, and then 1 on what I would call the eastern front. And you really had to think about how you're going to spend your cards amongst all of them because, now, let's be honest, the southern front was the one where you were coming across from Morocco.
Yes.
That was the one that was the hottest, but you still were doing stuff on each of the others, and I had to be prepared.
Yeah, you can't neglect anything.
Yeah, I liked that because I think a lot of times card-driven games suffer from, well, I'm only really worried about these couple of spots.
Yeah.
This really divided it.
If I go for the hammer
attention
here and I hammer, I will break this and I will win.
But then you've got 4 other spots that you've made no progress on.
Yeah, or you've been counterattacked and you lost.
Yeah.
And that's something, again, that I think is a good hallmark of a game like this is, you could do that. You have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
It's extremely risky. And you leave yourself very open to, failure or counterattacks. And in this one, everything feels so precarious that you really, that's a bold decision if you really want to close up and just do something in one area.
I also really liked the combat values were very low.
Yes.
Most of my units were 1s. I had a couple of 2s. A majority of yours were 1s and 2s. You had a couple of 3s, those Army of Africa units.
Yeah,
They were, if you remember, and these
but they were
the breakdown.
I think they had a reverse step, but the reverse step was much worse.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it was.
Okay,
it wasn't a huge
they weren't
difference.
one-steppers though, right?
No, they were not
No,
one-steppers.
yeah. They went down, to a 2,
to a 2.
but they could never receive replacements and never
Yeah.
get rebuilt. And that was like, so you got to use them.
Yeah. I feel like that disparate... I think our numbers were pretty much the same
Everywhere else.
but on that southern front. But I thought that made for a very interesting game because I knew I wasn't going to get necessarily overwhelmed. I could get 2 or 3 units in. Well, I think stacking limit was 2, if I remember correctly.
The stacking limit is a bit more complex than that.
Yeah.
I think it's 3.
3.
Effectively.
I always felt like with the mountains and the improved positions, I could get 2 or 3 units into a spot and I could hold up to your
and you're like
2 or 3 units.
I might lose the space.
Yes. So what?
You're doing that fighting retreat, just trying to attrit these irreplaceable, literally units, and I think that's cool.
And remember, you also, and I very much like this design choice, you could take a loss to prevent you from retreating.
In a mountain, yes.
And I thought that was really important. There were times I'm like, why the hell would I take a loss? And I'm like, well, because I want to force him to have to frickin' attack me again.
And that's when we talk about like that World War I aspect.
It feels like that.
Right? It's let's take the attrition, let's take the losses. I've got the replacement points to get them back into trenches and keep that cycle going.
And how many times did that happen? You would hammer me. I'd get down to like 2 reduced units, and then, the RP phase came up, and I was like, flip. And you only got like 2, I want to say. Maybe.
I think you got like 1 free or something like that.
But it was like, I'll flip that one, so all of a sudden you got to hammer that guy again. And it became interesting because near the end of the game, we started counting the steps as a measure of whether I could actually take over areas or not, or you, right? Yeah. And that was interesting because to me, it led to a different style of game than it was the first 2 or 3 turns. And I actually very much enjoyed that. The other cool thing about the Paths of Glory system is they use the core-sized units, right? The bigger size. Isn't that what they're called?
I believe so, yeah.
Yes, core-sized. They're the bigger counters. They're like the 1-inch counters.
Yep.
And then what did they call those?
Division size.
Division-sized are the
smaller ones.
0.75, 3/4 of an inch. I always liked that about Paths of Glory, and I'm glad they put that in this system.
Yeah.
Because while what we played, we never experienced the core-sized units, that's always an interesting thing. When that takes a loss, you can break those down into 2 division-sized, and then move those around to support other areas, depending on what's going on. Or you can
get 3 of those together to reform a core.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
If you have and I think
it's
that's
cool.
The logistical part that I like about this game as well is you're using cards to get all your replacement points and do all this other stuff and strategic movement, which is cool. But it's the ensuring that you have enough divisions and cores in your available replacements.
Yep.
Because if you have a core that takes a loss and gets killed, and you don't have 3 divisions in your available replacements, they are permanently removed from the game, and you get nothing out of it.
That's
they
brutal.
are crushed. So you must keep some things over here that you're not using as assets, basically, and so you're doing a lot of that, just making sure you have this little safety net. And I think that's such a little neat aspect to the game without being burdensome.
Yeah.
That really helps, my core, they took a beating, cool, we replaced them with some divisions. Then they don't fight as well, but there's a lot of steps there. They're well protected still.
Right.
That's going to be a lot to get them out. Okay, I've got enough time to get some replacements and then to reform the core. And it might take me a turn, but that's that investment of reforming guys. And I think that's just a part of games. A lot of games don't have that in it. Usually they're just like a shorter time frame where you just don't reform units in that way.
Right.
Or things get real complicated, or they just it's just numbers. Like, I've got some points and I buy some guys back.
Yeah.
This one, there's just that little bit extra layer that I think is really fun.
Well, I found that as we were playing, I got the true feeling that I was the commander of the entire, trying to make those decisions about where I put those replacement points, where I build my formations, what I end up abandoning it, and then what I end up fighting to the death on. And I liked that aspect of this game. I thought it was very well done.
Yeah.
And felt very similar to Paths of Glory. It really did. Even though that game we played 3 years ago and
that was a long time, yeah.
Didn't play a huge scenario.
But I think that there's some optional rules and stuff. The reality of this game is a 30-page rulebook. This is much bigger because this is also the scenarios and playbook and designer notes in the back. It's about a 30-page rulebook. It's very well written.
And the writing is very small. So when you say 30 pages, it's more like 40.
This is like a real...
normal size, yeah. But a lot of good examples, a lot of good explanation.
Yes. But
when you were taking your turns, I was typically looking at the rule book trying to, okay, how do I do this? How does this work?
But most of the, but if you've played Paths of Glory, you know how to play this.
Yeah,
That's the reality of this, which I think is a great, I love a good series game for that, even though it's not technically the same series, like a system game, because it's okay, what's the little nuances and differences here?
I know the basics.
I know how to play a card. I know how to move units. I know how a combat works. Like, I know that stuff, that's which is a lot of the meat of this. It's just a case of, okay, what have we got going on here that's new? And all those rules are very obviously kind of called out of like, hey, there's this and this and this, which is pretty neat. What I'll do is I'll show you how this works, which I already filmed.
At Buckeye Game Fest. So it's gonna be a totally different setting.
different
Be aware.
And we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So here's a look at the board. If you've played Paths of Glory, you'll be very familiar with how this looks. If you can hear a little bit of rumbling in the background, it's because I'm making this at Buckeye Game Fest. And so there's some gaming going on at the other side of the room. But this is, like you see, point-to-point movement. The units have a very, an identical, very similar makeup to Paths of Glory, where we have a combat number. This is the attack and defense value, the 1. In the middle, we have a 1, which is a loss number. And then on the right-hand side, we have the movement factor. Let me pick up one that's a little different here so that we can kind of see what that looks like. Let me get my tanks. Here we go. Now here's an Axis armored unit. So we have a 2 combat factor. It's white because this is an armor unit. When armor units attack into open, they get a +1 DRM. The 2 is the loss number in the middle. So if the opponent rolls 1 loss, nothing happens. You have to do 2 losses to satisfy that 2 loss number to flip it over. Then an additional loss after that will destroy this unit, but you have to get 2 to hit the armor in the first place. If you've played Paths of Glory, again, you'll be very familiar with the way that this particular CDG works. We have an ops value on the card, we have an event value on the card, and we have the replacement point values down here as well. So Nationalists get 1, Axis gets 0, Nationalists get 3, Axis gets 2. What you'll also see is you have CC, which is just a helpful reminder that this is a combat card. So this is a combat effect. Combat cards are also, you see, there's actually quite a lot of them in this as well. Combat cards are the only card type that can be discarded at the beginning of the turn before you refill your hand. Other than that, if the event has a star, if you use the event, it goes out of the game. So if you start milling through your good star cards, you're weakening your deck with good ops cards, and also you're getting rid of those events. So you have to be careful with those, right? This is 4 ops, or I can get the event. Do I want to keep the 4 ops cycling through my deck, or do I want to use the event, right? So you have a lot of give and take there as well. And the other part of cards is that the ops value is also the SR value, which is the strategic redeploy value. Strategic redeploy is getting guys out of your reserve box onto the board, or for running this guy, well, not that guy, like this guy all the way up here, like outside of his movement value. You can just pick a guy up, move through all connected friendly spaces to another one, and you can do a number of units equal to your strategic redeploy value, which is again the ops value of the card. So this guy can do 4. I could bring 1 guy out of my reserve box onto the board, and I could do 3 strategic redeploys on the board. Again, very similar. Can you see this? There's a little bit of glare here. I might stand here so there's a bit of a shadow. You have these little action markers. So every time you play a card, let's say I'm going to play it for the ops. It's my first action of the game. I do cards ops. I can do these an unlimited amount of times. if I play a card for, let's say, I'm going to do the replacement points. I get 2 nationalist ones and 1 Axis ones, so I mark those on here on the track. So I get 2 of these and 1 of these. And then I put my second action marker on the RP card. Now, what I cannot do is the same may not be played as consecutive actions. So for my third action, I can't do another replacement points because these would be consecutive on the same spot. I can do an SR if I wish, but I can't do 2 replacement points in a row. I can't do 2 strategic redeploys in a row. Or I might have a card that gives me reinforcements. I, funnily enough, don't have any here. Here we go. Oh, I got some nationalist reinforcements. Great. That's my 4th action. That goes on the nationalist reinforcements. I can only do 1 of those per turn. If I've got 2 or 3 reinforcement cards in my hand, I can only use 1 of them per turn. It doesn't matter how many I have, I can only use 1 of them. So you have to be very judicious about that. You can only use 1 Axis reinforcement. These are nationalist reinforcements. Axis reinforcements will literally say brackets, Axis reinforcements underneath them. Again, you can only use 1 of those. So if you have a hand of Italian reinforcements and German reinforcements, you can only use 1 of those because they're both Axis reinforcements. Again, it'll say that on the card as well. That was mobilization there. So the card plays, I play a card, you play a card, I play a card, you play a card, and you fill up this little matrix, and then you're done. You play 6 cards. You have a hand of 7, so you might have 1 spare. You might not, because you might play combat cards outside of combat. You can use all your cards very quickly if you use a lot of combat cards, at which point you use your, I don't play a card, and I use the 1 ops. You get 1 operation if you don't play a card. Or if you cannot play a card, again, 1 op. You don't play a card. Or if you're just trying to save your cards, let's say you have a bunch of cards in your hand that say not playable on turn 1. Well, I really want them for turn 2. I'm just going to take a bunch of 1-ops and hold these cards so that next turn I have these. I will draw fewer, but I've got all these good cards that I can immediately use out of the gate. Instead of discarding them to my discard pile, it might be 2, 3 turns, maybe even 4 before I get those back again when I needed them much earlier, and I could have held them by taking the 1-ops. The 1-ops gives relief on the board, seeds a little bit of tactical initiative, but those cards might be worth the payoff depending on how many of those you want to do. The last thing that we're going to talk about here is we'll do a little bit of combat. Again, combat's very, very simple. And by simple, I mean if you play Paths of Glory, it's very familiar, a little bit straightforward. There's not a ton of modifiers, which I really like, and it's because you'll do 2, 3, 4 combats each turn, maybe more than that even, but every time we're doing ops, a lot of them is moves and combats. So they streamlined that, so there's not a ton of different modifiers in the game. So there's 2 different combat tables. Early game, you basically have these very small divisional and brigade-sized units. Later in the game, you have the larger corps-sized units with much higher values, and they use a different fire table. So there's 2 fire tables. There is the division-sized units, the small counters, and there's the corps-sized units, the big counters. You will notice we go from anywhere from 0 hits to 3 hits, as opposed to 0 hits to 6 hits. And you do a lot more damage over here. Again, early game, it's a lot of militia, small division-sized units. We don't have the cooperation that we might need. We haven't organized our armies into effective fighting units in the same way that we might do later on in the game. So a very simple combat would be, let's say I play 2 ops. I've got these 2 guys, and they're going to attack into here. Okay. So my attack value, I have a 1 and a 1. Oh, sorry, it's a 1 and a 1. So I've got a 2 attack value. They have a 1, but I'm attacking into a mountain area. It's pictorial, and there's a little icon next to it. And what that means is that I, as the attacker, look at the mountain, and I have 1 column shift left. So I had a 2, I'm down to a 1. I'm going to roll on the 1 table. They have a 1, they're also going to roll on the 1 table. I can choose to play combat cards. The opponent can then choose to play combat cards. We're not going to do that. We're just going to roll the dice. And we both rolled a 4 and a 5 respectively. On the 1 table, a 4 and a 5 are both hits. So we're both going to do 1 damage to each other. Bit of a draw there. So to take a loss, you have to do a number of losses equal to the loss factor. In this instance, it's a 1. So they just flip over to a 1. I can choose which one of these I take the loss on. I'm going to take the loss on this one. That's the end of the combat. There's no retreats because we didn't do, if the attacker does more losses to the defender, then there's retreats that have to be done. But in this instance, there's none. Also, even if I was to, I'm in a mountain. Mountains can cancel retreats. So you can kind of stand pat and you don't have to leave. Let's look at something that's a bit bigger and bulkier. So let's say I've got my, my Army of Africa and I've got the Axis tanks that have come to support. And we're going to attack, let's pick a stack of dudes. I'll just move them all from up here. Let's get mill, and then RPA units. There's a stacking limit of 3, and that is a hard cap. You know what? I'm going to ditch one of those, and I'm going to pretend that we have a core unit in here. Most of the core units you get after mobilization. So, in this instance, we're going to add up the combat values. The Nationalists have a 3 and a 2, which is 5. And then the Republicans have a 2, a 1, and a 1, which is 4. However, this 4 is going to go on the core-sized table because we have any amount of core-sized units. So my 4 factors are much stronger than my 4 divisional factors, okay? But I also have this white armored value, which means I get a +1 because I'm attacking into an empty or an open space. So I'm going to roll on the 5 table, but I'm going to roll at a +1. So I'm probably going to hit on average on a 2 or a 3. They're going to roll a 4 straight, and they're probably on average going to hit on a 2 or a 3. So it's the size of the units and the types of units, they can even out kind of odds depending on what you've got going and what you can leverage. We're going to roll the dice with no combat cards. Okay, so we rolled a 2 with a +1 that goes to a 3. And these guys just rolled a 5. So then we're going to look at the loss table. So the Nationalists rolled on the 5 table, and they rolled a 3, which does 2 losses. So we're going to have to inflict 2 losses on these guys. And there's a lot of options about how you take those. So let's look at what our options are. So we have a 2 here, so we can satisfy both of those 2 losses by flipping this over if we wish. Or we could flip over this 1 and this 1. Or we could flip and then eliminate 1 if we were so inclined. Lots of different things that you can do depending on how many RPs, replacement points you have, what kind of tactical situation you're in, because what you might want to do, and this is because if this guy dies, he gets replaced by divisional units. If you don't have divisional units enough in your reserve box, he is permanently removed from the game. So you want to kill your divisions first. They're in the dead box. You can buy them back into the reserve box. Then you lose this guy, and he gets replaced with these guys. And there's this cycle of big and small units that you get into. So there's things to consider there. So we'll just take 2 losses on the small division units. We'll flip them both over. No, we're going to kill one of them because they both flip to 0s, and that's no good. So we'll kill one of them. He goes to the dead box. Now, we rolled on the 4. On the core size table, we rolled a 5, which does 4 step losses. Now that is a lot of step losses. So I've only got 3 steps here in our loss factors. So the first 2 have to go on the armor unit if you use the armor to attack. So we've got 2 there. And then I've only got 1 left here and 1 left here. So we have to take 1 on the Army of Africa as well, because every time the Army of Africa attacks, they have to take a loss if there's 1 to take, basically. So they're going to flip over. So that's 3 losses, and I've got 1 more loss. Depending on if I've got Axis armor replacements, I might do this one, because I can get it back. If the Army of Africa dies, he is gone from the game permanently. These can't be rebought. So they're very brittle, but they're very strong, especially in the early game with their 3 and 2 attack factors going up against usually militia units. So this is a tough choice. Do you permanently lose this, or do you use this and you have to spend the very rare and very expensive Axis replacement points to buy him back? It's up to you, tough choices. So we'll kill this guy because it's potentially we could get him back, whereas this guy we can never get back. And he's going to go back onto the board right here. and the attacker never retreats, even though we incurred more losses. That was just an absolute disaster, basically. But that's how combat works. You're going to do lots of combats, you're going to do lots of moves, you're going to build positions, you're going to build trenches, and it's effectively a case of moving around the board, trying to take these victory spaces, trying to accrue enough victory points so that you can win the game by the end of whichever scenario that you're doing. And every time you're exchanging victory points, you're also exchanging Republican morale. And if the Republican morale plummets enough, they will also kind of auto-surrender. Or if they can take enough territory and they can get their morale up to 28 or 29, like keep it really high, especially through the mid and late war, they can win by having very high morale as well. So there's two different paths to victory in reality if you're playing the campaign game. But that's how the game works, and what we'll do is wrap up here with a few final thoughts. So that was a look at the board and at least loosely how the game works. I love this game. This is 100%. A keeper for me.
Yeah, 100%. I loved playing this. In fact, we talked about this, and it's very hard for us to get this done, but I want to play this again.
Oh, yeah.
I want to do maybe the longer campaign scenario, although I think it was like 30 turns. Or
it's only 18 turns.
Okay. So we can definitely do it in like a long Saturday if we decided to.
Yeah, because I think we played, we set it up.
We played about 2 hours of play on Tuesday night.
And I think we only played like one.
Yeah, about 90 minutes, I think. So about 3.5 hours got us through 5 turns.
And
and that was learning the game.
But we have experience with the system. So we learned it, but also there was some knowledge already, but
my guess is 18 turns is going to take you about 10 hours.
I think this is going to be an all day, right?
10 to 12 hours, yeah.
But
it would be worth it.
But you're probably going to call it before then.
Yeah.
I think it might be obvious. It might not, but a lot of those games, that's usually the way that it goes. Like, it tilts and someone concedes. Sure. But this is going to be an all day, but it's going to be one of those incredible all days. You're going to remember this forever. It's going to be one of those things you talk about.
I think Paths of Glory is the same thing. We played a small scenario. I think we need to do the big game. We need to play it all weekend. Yeah.
I think because I soloed Pursuit of Glory using their CDG solo system from GMT, and it was amazing. Mm-hmm. It was so good. It ended up in like a catastrophic Axis defeat. Like they got
just overwhelmed.
They got steamrolled pretty badly. Every roll they were messing up so bad, and like so many mandatory attacks came up that were just awful. And that one was cool because it's almost like a States of Siege game, because there's like 5 different fronts and everyone's just coming in on the Ottoman Empire.
Well, this like, actually, you mentioned States of Siege. This kind of felt like that, frankly.
A little bit.
That's why I brought up like the 2 points on the north, the 1 on the east, and the 1 or 2 points on the south.
Yeah.
It felt like a States of Siege series game.
It's not like linear in its feel, at least.
Yeah. But I now want to play Paths of Glory again.
Yeah.
Now that it's been a couple of years, now we've played another game in the system. I would play this again in a heartbeat. I'm very glad that we chose this to put it on our Shelf of Shame list. I don't regret playing it at all. In fact, I loved it, had a great time, and very much enjoyed it.
It's that classic, how many Spanish Civil War games have we played, right?
Well, we actually went through and we counted them up.
It's not many.
It's like 3.
We played this.
We have played
Land and Freedom.
Which really isn't, I mean, it's not really a war game, let's be honest.
No, it's more of a
Euro style, but it's fun. It's interesting. Yeah. What's the other one?
I don't know if
I feel like there's another one we played. We also have that 1836 from De Vere Games.
Yes,
that we need to play.
So we have
here somewhere.
That one. Yeah,
maybe it's on my
shelf. It's called España, right? We
also
have SES Guadalajara.
Yep.
Which is like one space in this game.
Yeah.
And then we also have the tactical game. It's right behind your head somewhere. Something Los. It's also from Compass. It is a tactical Spanish Civil War game.
Okay.
And it is geomorphic maps.
Las Barricadas.
Las Barricadas.
Las Barricadas.
I got that kicking around.
That's a game we need to play because I've heard good things about that.
Also a
one.
Shelf of Shame game.
Yeah.
Like there's a couple of games out there, and it's like, oh yeah, why don't you have a couple of these? But like this was incredible, right?
Sure.
But
to me, this is the best one we've played. We haven't played that many.
No.
This is the best one we played. Is that going to hold up over maybe España 1936 and A Las Barricadas?
It'd be hard pressed to knock.
It's probably going to have that top spot, but
I like the grand, strategic style game, right? I like it's the Spanish Civil War in a box.
Yep.
There's something about that.
Well, the cards, I mean, we already talked about it, but the cards take in every historical event. There are figures in there. It actually learned a lot. I don't know a ton about the Spanish Civil War. The only other comment I would have about setup, right? Because I'm not European, and because I am not familiar.
I am, and it was a struggle.
And because I don't have familiarity with the layout of Spain, when you would read a name in that setup book, it was like blankety blank.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where the hell is that?
And
it would have been nice had they put numbers on the outside and been like, it's an A12, and then you triangulate it. Oh, there it is. How many times did we look?
Well, having set it up now, the way that the setup is actually pretty decent. Just remember, it was a big front line.
I know, it kind of followed.
And so it does that, but if you don't know that,
well,
and the way that
True.
it curves, it's kind of like, okay, and then sometimes it jumps around a little bit, but it's also like you have to know that.
Yeah.
It's a classic issue that if it's a geography you don't know, then it's like, okay.
Yeah. Where is this?
What's this very long name? And some of the names look similar.
And the writing on the board's pretty small.
Yeah.
And then finding the counters to match, because some of the counters were specific types and units.
Like these are the Aragon units.
Yeah, and it was
these are these guys.
That was my only concern. Maybe a setup sheet would have been nice.
Once it's set up, though.
Yeah, I agree.
But
that was my only. I wanted to bring up something that I was concerned about.
It reminds me of 1918 Brother Against Brother with all those Finnish names.
I remember that.
Really, really good game, by the way. I don't even know if you can still get that, but really good game. But it was like the setup was like, I don't even know how to say this name to you, so I'm going to show it to you. Can you find the space on the board, and I'll get the piece.
Well, I think we had the same thing with the Here I Stand game, the 4-player.
Oh, gosh, yes.
We had the same
Tanto
thing.
Monte. That was very difficult
same
as well.
thing. I had the same problem. So
that one's almost worse, because at least these are modern names. I know, like, some of these places have football teams that I know of, and I kind of know where some of them are.
Yeah.
But those ones, it's
like 500 years
names,
ago. Yeah.
And they got all the old, and so it's like, huh?
So that's more an American and an idiotic Brit problem.
Just bear with the setup and get it.
Yeah. But that was really my only complaint. I thought the play aids were great. They're a little flimsy. I mean, these are just paper.
Yeah.
Right? Which... Counters were great. They're simple. Cards were great.
Pre-rounded counters.
Pre-rounded counters. The art was good. I loved how they included the historical pictures and the historical posters. Well, I said that and now I can't find one. There we go. Historical picture. I just thought it was very well done.
I actually really like. And the board is very simple. And what I like that in a game typically, because then I'm focusing on like the pieces.
Yeah.
And it's not a board that has real high contrast like strains my eyes, and it gets tough to look at.
Yeah, the pink and the pink and the blue
and the
was
kind
a
of
good
sandy
choice.
beige background means that it's easy to assess. Okay, here's my guys, and instead of being like gray pieces on a gray green board, there are some games we play it. It's like, where my pieces, you've camouflaged them.
Yep.
What are we doing? I like a game that's like that.
Yeah.
I think it's ease of use.
I would say if you can find a copy of this at a reasonable price, get it, because it's a great game. It really is.
Yes, and I know our friends at Noble Knight Games have it. That's where I got my copy, and I don't know what a reasonable price looks like, but
it's a big game.
I paid probably $120 for this,
and it's well worth it.
To me, that's worth every penny.
Well, that's
expensive, but
two huge mounted map boards, pre-rounded counters. I mean, this rule book, I could do some.
If they ever do another reprint of this, you've got to jump on it.
Yeah, very good.
But yeah, Crusade and Revolution from Compass Games. This is the deluxe second edition. I don't know anything about the first edition. I presume it's paper maps, and I presume it's fine.
Probably. I do know they made some changes to it, though,
did they?
like rules clarifications, and I'm trying to remember the interview that I did with David like 3 years ago, but
like
there were some changes.
You want to get this one?
Oh, 100%.
It's very nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, you got to check this out. Amazing Shuffle of Shame game. Really happy we got it played.
Actually, I think this was one of the better ones that we've played. I very much enjoyed Dien Bien Phu last year.
I liked a lot of the games we played.
Well, I
last
did
year.
too. But this one, I think, was really,
Yeah, no,
really
this
good.
is like
top of the shelf.
if
for
you,
me.
yeah, agreed. Like this will never leave my collection.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
This is a keeper for the rest of my life.
Yes. Yep.
That's
Agreed.
how good this is.
Yep.
But yes, Crusade Revolution from Compass Games. You got to check this out. But appreciate you very much for tuning in. I've been Alexander for PlayerSaid.com.
And I'm Grant.